Okay, welcome back to the Snap. We've just had the results through and the wee hours of the morning, Patrick. Of course, Labour holding on to the constituency. Do you think it's fair to say that 323 votes have just saved Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party?
I think in the short term, it's warded off the leadership challenge that you and I were predicting, and that the mainstream media came around to predicting at the beginning of this week, name-checking Angela Rayner as the most likely challenger. I do think hanging on to the seat, albeit by the skin of their teeth, against expectations, has given Keir Starmer a little bit of time, and probably a party conference and a keynote speech to try and picture out some vision and some policy areas that might be able to connect to some voters. So those 323 votes, yeah, they could be looked back on as a thin but crucial margin.
Yeah, I'm sure people have seen the results by now, but in case you didn't, Labour holding on to the Batley and Spen constituency by a margin of less than 1% of the vote, just 323 votes in it. George Galloway's Workers' Party performing very strongly indeed, Patrick, polling around 22% of the vote. And when we talk about such fine margins, this 323 majority, bear in mind the Lib Dems got 1,200 votes, the Yorkshire Party 800 votes, the English Democrats 207 votes, and UKIP 151 votes. Patrick, what do you make of those numbers?
Well, I think the other factor there is the absence altogether of a Green candidate who could easily have got 1,000 votes, mostly off the Labour tally. So there's all kinds of factors which could have tipped the balance when the result is this close. I think we talked in the last episode, the pre-polling day episode of the Snap, about a couple of imponderables, and one of which was Kim Leadbeater, the Labour candidate, being hassled and harassed and appearing to stand up quite pluckily to that as winning her sympathy. The other, of course, was what I would say is Boris Johnson's horrendous mishandling of the Hancock Ferrari, which, you know, equally you could see as easily a big enough factor to have cost the Conservatives the seat.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting as well is the expectation management of this, because it's been seen as a bit of a boost for Keir Starmer, as you pointed out. The briefings were really accelerating in terms of a potential leadership challenge to Starmer had Labour lost the by-election. I mean, a challenge looked almost certain, really. But let's not forget, I mean, this constituency, you know, Labour are in opposition. It's a constituency that Labour have held since the 1990s. And in fact, in 2017, they had a majority just shy of 9,000. So in the grand scheme of things here, how much of a victory can you really say this is for Starmer? It seems to me it's setting the bar pretty low indeed.
Yes, I think the bar was set pretty low. In any normal run of politics, the opposition should be able to hold by-election seats that they were already holding without breaking sweat, really. But these aren't usual circumstances. And given Galloway's standing, and given the leading right of centre independent not standing, you know, the betting markets thought the Tories would win, and the expectations were confounded. So that is quite useful to Keir Starmer. It's a low bar, but it is one that everyone expected him to trip over, and he is in fact just scraped clear of it. So he's earned himself a little bit of time. Personally, that's probably going to suit the Tories well enough, because I don't see him remotely as a plausible general election winner. However, the Conservatives' old enemy of complacency came back to stalk them in this campaign, particularly over the handling of the Hancock issue, and also their own campaign on the ground, where they seem to shield their candidate both from the media and from a lot of the voters as well. That didn't look gutsy compared to what the Labour candidate was doing.
And finally, just before we move on, I'd just like to give two other bits of information here, just for context on this by-election contest. First of all, James Johnson on Twitter saying, from all saying Labour's hold in Batley and Spen is a great result for them, apart from the remarkably rare Tory gains in Copeland and Hartlepool, the 2.9% swing away from Labour last night was the biggest swing towards a governing party in 39 years. And you also had Ben Riley Smith tweeting out Labour's vote share in Batley and Spen. 2017, it was 55.5. 2019, it was 42.7. And 2021, it's down to 35.3. So that's a 20 percentage point drop in 4 years. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's all, long-term very bad news for the Labour Party and feeds into the narrative of it losing gradually its red wall, but not losing it all at once. It's a bit more complicated than that. But then again, it is a by-election with loads of special factors that's hard to pull out and make it a decisive moment. Long term for politics either way. But what I would say, to be fair to Keir Starmer, had Labour lost, you and I and the trailing mainstream media, which has only just caught up with his crisis, would have been having his guts for garters. So he's entitled to sort of 2 cheers and temporary salvation for a few weeks, I suppose.
Now, moving on, of course, we like to highlight positive news here on the Snap. A really great story, major story, Patrick, in terms of Nissan backing the UK, new electric car and battery plant. We're talking overall about 6,200 jobs at the Sunderland plant and in the British supply chains. Absolutely, of course, flies in the face of what we were told for years could or may happen, that the consequence of Brexit would be some sort of economic carnage. Instead, we see huge investment, a great, great story.
I think it's overall £1 billion investment package, and motor industry experts say it's a vital show of confidence and are expecting up to £8 billion worth of more auto industry investment in manufacturing and also battery plants for electric vehicles over the next few months. I would just like to pay tribute here to the people of Sunderland. Nissan was the linchpin of their local economy. And they were told in the run up to the Brexit referendum time and again, if you vote leave, Nissan will leave. They didn't blink, they weren't bluffing, they voted for Brexit anyway. And I think they knew their own value. This plant was one of the jewels in the Nissan crown globally, one of the most efficient and productive plants. And they weren't prepared to sacrifice national sovereignty on the basis of those threats. And they've been vindicated, and they've been vindicated specifically in 2 ways. First of all, the government has been able to put in some state aid to make the deal happen, some tens of millions of pounds. Highly unlikely that would have been allowed under EU rules. And secondly, the actual details of the Brexit trade deal has been a boon for us, because the details are now that you can't just assemble parts made elsewhere in Britain and get tariff-free access to the European market. You have to actually manufacture more of the vehicles in Britain. Now, people thought that Nissan and other foreign car makers might pull up sticks because of that. In fact, they've laid down deeper roots. They've decided to do the battery for electric car manufacturing actually next door to the Nissan plant in Sunderland itself. And it's a sort of double whammy of win. And I'm delighted now, on the back of the example the Sunderland workers have set, they're getting government ministers a bit more punchy about Britain's place in the world. The most recent example, Rishi Sunak talking up the ability of the City of London and our financial services sector to prosper, thrive, and actually get a bigger competitive advantage through not being tied into EU arrangements. So well done, Sunderland workers. You're the best of us, and you're getting the best results for Britain.
Absolutely, well said. And I just want to mention this as well, Patrick, is that it's another area where the Brexit reality is just smashing apart the project Dear Miss. It's something we've talked about before, but it's wage rises. And we even had the BBC today in an article admit that Brexit is helping contribute to a big jump in pay for lorry drivers. We've also seen a rise in wages for construction workers. We've also seen in hospitality and catering, wages up 18%, up 10% in retail. It's just another area, I think, where us Brexiteers have been completely vindicated in terms of our argument of cheap EU labour holding down, suppressing wages. Again, some Remainers try to pretend that was not true. Well, you can see it's not taking very long. We're talking really just months outside of the transition period. And you're seeing one after another all of these things that Brexiteers predicted come true, Patrick?
You certainly are. And it's still these reports on the likes of the BBC are seen through the prism of this being a problem, because, you know, middle class people with lots of money might have to spend a bit more of it if wages have gone up in manufacturing industry or indeed in domestic help and things like that. I think you might see a sort of fracturing now between the middle class liberal left on the one hand and the old-fashioned working class left on the other about this, and that they always, the working class left elements in the Labour Party were still very anti-Brexit, and they poo-pooed this idea about an excess of labour depressing wages. They're now seeing it in action, that what we were saying, what we predicted was coming true. And I would be astonished were there not some kind of big swing behind Brexit, further swing among the activist levels of the trade union movement, for starters. I think their members would just look askance if that doesn't happen. But among the middle class liberal left, it'll still be all about the price of the local tapas bar or whatever it is, but they're in a minority.
Yeah, but you're right, Patrick. I mean, I find it striking that with all of these bumper wage rises in these areas going across as what's called as the tightening of the labour market, socialists and Labour MPs are completely and utterly silent about it. I find that pretty remarkable. And what I also find quite sad, really, is that you're still seeing hardline Remainers in a sense of complete denial, Patrick, I've got to say. And when I highlighted this story, their argument coming back to me now is, oh, it's going to lead, this is all going to lead to increased prices, etc. Well, by that argument, you're effectively saying that any wage rises ever are bad news. It's ridiculous. And, you know, it's sad to see some still stuck in this negative mindset where Brexit reality is disproving the Remainer myths. And yet some people just still will not accept it, that what Brexiteers said on things like wage compression, in terms of investment, it's true. It's happening now. We can see it.
Yeah, it absolutely is true. And I think it just exposes that most of the modern British left is not motivated by struggling to improve pay and conditions for working people. It's more happy clappy, one world, no borders, let's not be mean, everyone come in and kind of mix match multiculturalism. Again, that's all about consumer choice and people who've got money to spend and all the different cuisines they can have on their high street. They're miles removed from the experience of the ordinary British working person. And until, you know, this entity called the Labour Party starts focusing again on what used to be its core purpose, I don't really see it making much progress in, you know, long term, even in places like Batley and Spen, where it's just held on in the by-election. Yeah, well, look, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss the next episode of The Snap, and we will be back soon. See you soon, everyone.